there's an underappreciated emotional motivation in games, especially among whales, and that's the idea of a provider. If a lot of people in a group look up to the person at the top who is quite literally just buying lots of items and consumables and things like that for their group, it's a real source for revenue for a game. And I don't think that should be missed. It's not necessarily all about power scaling. There's other emotional vectors that we can use to help make a game more sustainable. And then just reframing, what a whale is. It's not necessarily somebody that's spending to get an advantage in the game. It's somebody that's spending to help support the game. And if you reframe it like that and you tell the consumers, like, hey, the reason this person has all this cool stuff is because they're literally helping the game survive. I think that's just a cool reframe, and I think that's unexplored territory right now in terms of messaging.
Welcome to the Deus Ex Down podcast.
Welcome to the Deus Ex Down podcast. I'm your host Kepler, and today we have a roundtable discussion about game economies. And I'm fortunate enough to be joined by three guests who are much more equipped than me to talk about this topic. So I'm sure we will get interesting insights out of the discussion. Welcome guys. Great to have you all together here. Maybe everyone can give like a first intro of themselves first, like 1 minute maximum. And let's start with Nick, because you already know how it works.
Yeah, sure. What's up, everybody? Thanks for listening in today. My name is Nick Metzler. I'm a gaming tokenomics advisor for Shima Capital. I'm a venture partner over there, and I assist their portfolio companies with designing game tokenomics. My background is in game design, but it's in game design from pretty much every medium you can imagine. So I've done board games, I've done card games, I've done survivor challenges, escape rooms, theme park ride gamification, education gamification, kind of like everything under the sun, basically. And the through line with all of that is a deep understanding of human behavior and incentives. So that paired really, really nicely with crypto. So I jumped into crypto and trying to help shape the industry. I think there's a lot of solutions and a lot of puzzle pieces that are scattered about, and it just takes a lot of people coming together and putting the pieces in the right places to help change this. And I'll pass it over to Michael.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me on the podcast. I'm Michael, based in Japan, originally from Germany. I'm actually in Germany right now at my parents' place. I've been full-time working on blockchain games since early 2019. So I studied economics, but then later learned programming, and I worked as an engineer at a company in Japan called Double Jump Tokyo. We built a game called My Crypto Heroes, where I worked as an engineer, but then later on also helping with the game economy and ecosystem design, because I had interest because of my economics background. And I did that until early 2021. And then 2021, I did some advisory for Yield Guild Games, helping with tokenomics in the early days. Then I worked with Blackpool Finance, which is another blockchain gaming DAO. Was there on the investment side, but also helped a bit on like building the token and the staking and all that. And then end of 2021, I wanted to go back to building games because there's so much attention and money in this space, but still no good games. So I joined Mighty Bear Games, which I've been now for over 1.5 years now. Basically joined as the Web3 lead, helping the company move from Web2 to Web3. And I'm basically like the product owner for anything that touches Web3. Sadly, don't program anymore, but basically helping the company make sense of this space and building Mighty Action Heroes, which is our first blockchain game. Yeah, passing over to Heimdall.
Hey guys, I'm Heimdall. I work at Citadel. It's an on-chain space game. I come from a risk analysis background. I got back into the NFT scene in October of 2021. I saw a lot of issues with the economics design of different games, specifically on-chain games. They had a lot of value leakage, suffering from like tragedy of the commons scenarios. So my whole goal there was just to solve that issue. I submitted that idea to Citadel. they liked the idea and they brought me on the team, and I've been working there for the last 20 months or so, creating a economically robust, governance heavy on-chain game in space.
Cool. So yeah, we have a lot of different backgrounds. So I guess to kick things off would be helpful for the viewers to understand like where your viewpoints are coming from. So maybe you can have like in one sentence or two sentences, share your philosophy of how you think about game economy design. So for example, for me, I also have like an economics background. So it would be looking more at behavioral economics rather than something like finance, for example. And then just thinking about, okay, if I think about like crypto economies, it's very much an open market. So we have like a financial layer. So we should accept that and just like, yeah, manage it basically. So yeah, maybe what's like your design philosophy basically? Let's start with Nick again.
Yeah, sure. Design philosophy for me has really focused on what are the differences between crypto gaming and every other type of gaming. I find that mindset really helps me dial into what makes these games exciting or fun or unique. And so a lot of that has also developed from the misconceptions that the space has. So if I was to summarize it in like one or two sentences, it would be money doesn't come from thin air. You need more money coming in than coming out. And supply is a function of demand and not the other way around. And if there is, if something can happen, it probably will happen. And then if somebody can repeat an action and earn value from it, that action will be repeated until it reaches the market rate, which is typically 0. So I would say that those are kind of my guiding principles in this space.
Guess I go next. There are a lot of nuggets in there, so let's see if I can add anything to that. Yeah, my philosophy, just observing games in the last 3 years or 4 years in the space, is that game ecosystems, they need to be sustainable. And my definition of sustainable is that it doesn't need or shouldn't need new users to join in to sustain the prices and sustain the economy. So I think the economy ideally should be like self-sustaining with the same amount of users. We've seen games that are kind of like very reliant on new folks entering the ecosystem or buying NFTs. I don't think that's very sustainable. I think we need to move away from these things. Yeah, that's my philosophy in one sentence.
I would say our philosophy is pretty simple. It's protect the player at all costs. Purely, you want to design an economy with intrinsic value, economic stability. Players can be confident in the value of their assets. And everything you add to the economy should be designed with the best interests of the player in mind.
Okay, already like we can build on a lot of these nuggets you dropped. So let's maybe start with like the first one, which Nick mentioned, that basically like, yeah, he's looking at the difference between like traditional games and Web3 games. So I think like one part of it would also be looking at, okay, what kind of games do you think lend themselves towards adding crypto elements? I guess they're something that you feel like, okay, this is easier to build a sustainable economy with. So for example, if we have like PvP games, right, it's like a zero-sum action where you can have basically a token sink in a way. Or you could say, okay, if we have a lot of social gameplay, that this can motivate people to spend for social status within their guild. And then you can have like wars between guilds that also leads to spending. So yeah, anything you can share here, like what you observed or what you're thinking about right now, like, yeah.
Yeah, I'll touch on one thing for PvP and skill-based gameplay, and then I'll pass it over to Heimdall, because I think something I'm going to say about UGC is going to resonate with him. So a big trend that I've seen in Web3 gaming is a big focus on PvP, because it's a zero-sum game. So you can bet against each other, and the other player, whoever wins, will get the pot, or rewarding people at the highest echelons of the leaderboard. While this is economically sustainable, I don't know if this is like game-wise sustainable. And the reason is, if you rewarding, say, the top 10% of players, if you're not in the top 10% of players and you don't feel like you can get in the top 10% of players, do you churn out because you're consistently having to pay into it? And if you don't feel like you can, get up, maybe you do churn out, and that's expensive from a UA perspective. And in a situation like this, that pool gets ever smaller, and the game eventually implodes on itself because there's not enough players to sustain it. And I'm worried that a over focus on pure skill-based rewarding will lead to that future. But when I'm thinking about the differences between, say, traditional games and where Web3 games can really shine, one of the aspects that I think really sticks out is the potential for UGC, as well as incentivization of UGC and curation of UGC. The idea that you can have lots of people all working together on a decentralized base that are increasing the network effects of the game, each adding to the game, maybe plugging in new mods, testing it out, having the possibility of getting paid for it. And I think that really leads into the thesis of autonomous worlds. And that's where I'm going to pass it off to Heimdall.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. UGC in the Web2 space, I mean, there are good monetization models to reward creators, but obviously that's really improved in the Web3 space. People can actually have real ownership of their different mods. I mean, you just think back to games like Warcraft 3 that had the Warcraft 3 map editor. I'm sure everyone here messed with that when they were kids. A lot of the best game models came out of that map creator, right? We had Dota, and then say Daisy, created the battle royale kind of mod meta. In Web3 space, I mean, allowing for that kind of UGC, that kind of mod creation, and then for players to actually own that and to monetize that and create opportunity for themselves, I think is really where you get this economic scaling, similar to a real world economy, rather than these kind of closed economies from the Web2 space. I do think high skill cap games will do really well in the Web3 space because it allows for more economic mobility. I think that's actually an issue that you were kind of referencing. Like leaderboard based rewards definitely can cause issues because it creates an accumulation of rewards towards the top for sure. But allowing for a high skill cap can lead to more economic mobility where there's not so much power in there's not so much of a accumulation in the power that players can purchase for different things. So more skill, less power, and purchase power, I guess. But yeah, I'll pass it off to Michael.
Yeah, I think UCG is pretty powerful in Web3. I think I personally want to bring it back to like the PvP angle because this is what we're building at Mighty Action Heroes. Actually, Nick, to your point, I actually agree with you that just concentrating the rewards on the top 10% is discouraging, I would say, for the other 90%. So I think you need to have different kind of roles and player types in the ecosystem that you're building. So the competitive players, we call them warriors, and that term was stolen from the My Crypto Heroes days. But basically, those folks want to compete, they want to win, that's what they want. Yes, they care about the rewards, but they also care about the fame, the recognition, and then you have like the other folks that are like to just grind the game and play. We call them farmers. So they just like make sure that the warriors have enough resources, and they might play PvP. They might do like weekly, daily quests to get some rewards and then sell this to the other warriors that care about other things. But just kind of like as an example, how League of Legends is kind of structured, like, also in looking at esports and how that works, is like the game inherently is fun. People like players like to play it. And if you compete in the, let's say, top, I think 1%, or it's even like 0.5%, I think, then you can be in an esports team and actually earn by salaries. But I think in Web3, you earn by, getting heroes, getting weapons that you can trade. So I think like I like the financialization in games. That's why I'm in the space. But I think hyper financialization is a bit tricky. I think the games need to be inherently fun, and then you add like a pretty interesting, exciting like financial layer on top of it. And I think like PvP heavy games have this strength of like you have trading of the farmers giving things to like the warriors, and the warriors who just want to just keep spending money to be on top of the leaderboards. but I think also, Nick, to your point, I think like guild versus guild gameplay is pretty interesting. Then it goes into like recognition and being in a community, and then I think whales just like to be respected in their guild and keep spending. But that's, I still haven't seen that done well in games yet, although I think to some extent in like Axes with scholarships and these guilds. But I think that will also come.
Yeah, something I want to throw in there just as a nice tip to listeners. There's an underappreciated emotional motivation in games, especially among whales, and that's the idea of a provider. If a lot of people in a group look up to the person at the top who is quite literally just buying lots of items and consumables and things like that for their group, that's a real source for revenue for a game. And I don't think that should be missed. It's not necessarily all about power scaling. There's other emotional vectors that we can use to help make a game more sustainable. And then just reframing, what a whale is. It's not necessarily somebody that's spending to get an advantage in the game. It's somebody that's spending to help support the game. And if you reframe it like that and you tell the consumers like, hey, the reason this person has all this cool stuff is because they're literally helping the game survive. I think that's just a cool reframe, and I think that's unexplored territory right now in terms of messaging.
I would agree with you there. I think there's been a lot of mislabeling around different player archetypes. Like I think we hear a lot in the Web3 space about value extractors or speculators. I think everybody that's in the Web3 space is a speculator. We're even speculators to some extent. We're speculating that blockchain games are going to succeed, right? I think like villainizing certain player archetypes is a super, like, oh, the whales are, this or that. Or I think if you're calling people value extractors, you just haven't designed the economy that well. But that's just my opinion.
Quick question before we continue, Heimdall. And for you, Michael, too. Speculation in games, speculators in games, is that a good thing? Should we, try to have that in there, or should we try to create an economy that has minimal speculation? I know this is a bit of a spectrum, but I'm curious to get your guys' take on it. I'm very much on the keep speculation inside the game point. But
yeah, I think it comes back to what's entertaining for the players. And I think for the Web3 audience, speculation is entertaining. It doesn't need to be like financial speculation, although I think that's a big part of it. I think it can be also like, does the meta change? That could be speculation. If there's a next patch coming up, like how does that shift the meta and the builds that I'm using? And some traders like to speculate on these things, like say, oh, this specific hero has been quite weak. Maybe it gets buffed. Maybe I just pile up this hero. I mean, that's, I don't know, just zooming out, right? That's all of crypto is like a PvP game. And I think folks are speculating like, which current cycle are we in? Is it like, I don't know, altcoin cycle? We're now in like hamster racing, animal racing cycle, and then goes back to like shit coins, then back to like NFTs, back to games, like whatever the narrative currently is. So I think, I don't know, it's just very entertaining. If you just keep trading, you're on Twitter, you're on Discord, like that's the real metaverse for me. And I think like speculation drives a lot of the fun, not necessarily just financial speculation. It's just, I don't know, it's just entertainment in my opinion.
Yeah, I've said the same thing. Like this is the metaverse. Actually, we're all living in it. It's all the different social media sites connected together. But yeah, I think speculators are good. Financial and like you said, Michael, I think that's a great point. Meta speculators. Maybe people think something will be balanced in the future, and they'll start buying up some particular item or something like that. I mean, that kind of thing happened in Eve, where they made a balanced decision based on, I think it was like missiles or something like that versus torpedoes. And it just tanked the market in torpedoes, I think. And so some people were able to like short that. I think allowing for speculation and integrating it, and actually you can even monetize speculation a little bit. If you have an asset that has some sort of intrinsic value, maybe this will be meandering a bit too much, but you can monetize speculation through royalties on secondary, essentially, and drive more value towards like a game treasury, which reflects more value back to the economy overall. Or just having real financial markets in your game, just like Eve. There's some players who sit in this station all day and just trade items back and forth, and that's their fun. They love to find market inefficiencies, right? So yeah, that would be.
I think you bring up a really good point. Find their fun. It's not like everybody's fun is the same thing. And I think that's another big misconception is like, well, we need to make fun games. It's like, okay, well, fun for who? Like fun is a subjective experience. Some people really like Cards Against Humanity. Some people really like, drama shows, right? Like everybody's type of fun is different. And I think Web3 brings in a new category of gamers, a new type of fun. It's not going to appeal to everybody. And I think we need to be comfortable with that fact. It's like, yeah, the market size is 3 billion gamers, but how many really want that financial layer? I would say probably not all 3 billion of them, but there's probably a subset and maybe some people who weren't in that original 3 billion that we can bring in. It may make a completely different market. And I think with every different type of medium of gaming, you see different types of people engaging with it. And I don't think we should forget that.
And I guess it also depends on if we say, okay, speculators, they're good in the game when they have like a certain weight, like it's a certain percentage of the overall players, right? So we can like model that and control it to some degree at least. Because like in the real world, we also have speculation, right? And it doesn't destroy like our whole economy. So it's more of like accepting that there will be speculation, I guess, like, yeah, just seeing, okay, what kind of fun do they get out of the speculation? How do we deal with it? And then how we monetize it in the end. I think there are a couple of good points in there. So let's move on to the next topic. I think like one part that we observed with a lot of the first generation games was basically hyperinflation, right? That's the first thing to get right, in my opinion. So yeah, could you just share like your opinion on what are like certain levers that you can use, like either on the tap side or on the sync side? Like how would you go about like balancing that better than it has been before?
Yeah, I guess I'll start. I think it's important to understand why inflation was a thing in the first place. And I think a lot of that was left over from DeFi and trying to combine it with Web2 mindset. So the Axie Infinity model, the dual token model, really stemmed from the idea that we were going to do a premium currency and soft currency. And soft currency is typically something you give out like in mass, right? And so they made both of those tokens. And the whole mindset of DeFi was that you give out more and more tokens to increase decentralization, gain more adoption, because more people having more things would be beneficial. And I think a lot of people ended up copying that same model across multiple different games, even though that didn't necessarily work. But I would say that the inflation component served a few important pieces. Number one, it allowed for greater access. Lots of people could, then own the Axies, the NFTs, and more people could have access to the token, right? Especially if it was being given out for free. Of course, people would want to get something if it's given out for free, especially if it has value. And I think it was meant first as a piece for adoption. And it wasn't really focused on trying to retain as much value inside the token or the NFTs. I think a big piece of that mentality has shifted, or at least I hope has shifted. And I guess with that background, that backdrop, it helps to elicit what the new levers are for helping control that. And so I would say this is a big problem of distribution. And how do you distribute, and in what format do you distribute, and who are you distributing to? So it's not necessarily an inflation problem to me. It's more of a question of distribution and how do you manage supply. I don't know if anybody wants to touch that or just kind of their own levers.
Yeah, no, I think you're right on point here. I think most of it was really user acquisition. I think for Axie and for Steppen is like UA. DeFi, they call it the flywheel. It's just like more folks coming in, buying more, let's say, Axies, that brings up the demand of SLP, that puts the SLP price up, that increases demand for Axies and so on, and just like spirals up. It's obviously great for the narrative and bringing people in. But I think if it spirals out of control and you don't add actual consumption, then this is when the inflation kicks in. And I think Steppen, they understood this. They tried to do it. They thought they had more time to add like proper syncs to it. And I think they were talking about like buying actual sneakers from like Adidas, Nike, with the currency and then kind of get them out of circulation. But I think they hit that tipping point like 2 or 3 months before they could actually ship this. So I think timing that inflation is really hard as well. And as Nick said, like inflation is not necessarily a bad thing. Like if you can get the assets at a good price to a bigger audience and you kind of control that inflation and it's also communicated and priced into the assets, I think it's fine. But I think if the entire game just runs on this flywheel and it's flying up and then it's also flying down, because those flywheels, they can like spiral down really fast, out of control. And then you have a lot of users that bought the top, they're upset. And they also trusted the team that the prices will stay there, and they invested more than they should have, and then they get upset, rightfully so, and then they churn and never come back. So I think that's something we also as game developers have to kind of think about. Like I think we need to protect the users and not like build over financialized systems. I think the assets that we create, at least that's what we approach this in our game, is that assets should be like, you should be able to afford them. Yes, they should be designed in a way that if there's more demand for those assets, the price goes up, but not designed in a way like, oh, they can go easily 100x within a week and then drop down another 90% within another week. I think that's just like too stressful for the average user, and that's not what we want to. That's not the financial stress we want to give our players. And then there's the whole conversation of faucets and sinks and net positive versus net negative things. I think that's a whole different episode, but just in short, I think you need to differentiate between sinks that are like indirect investments. So I think like spending SLP to breed another Axie to get more SLP is just leads to inflation, like a delayed inflation. So it's like a short-term sink, but like long-term inflation. And consumption is the actual thing that you want. And consumption in terms of like, I spend some currency for fun and just get some emotional returns, or I can save time in the game. Like those are the better sinks, but those are much harder to implement. So I went a bit on a tangent here, but it's kind of like my 2 cents for this. Heimdall, do you have any thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, I mean, Axie is a great example of like explosive population growth. I think we take a little bit different approach to not allowing that. I think that a measured population growth is probably better for an open economy. I mean, that's typically how it happens, how it works in the real world. If you have like 10,000% player growth, you're going to have issues with inflation, infrastructure, which would be like your liquidity pools. All kinds of things are going to be at haywire, especially if you haven't had suitable time to balance the economy before that happens, which happened with Axie. So I think a measured player growth strategy is probably easier to manage, better for the players. You don't get a lot of those people who are unhappy that something was $150 and now it's $10 or whatever it's at. But and it gives you time to work things out as you go along. You don't have new states showing up in the United States overnight and there's nothing there to support them. A couple of things I would touch on too is just avoiding frictionless earning, which I think Nick touched on in his intro. Avoiding frivolous earning. So for menial tasks, you shouldn't be handing out a soft currency for anything that a player does. And as far as sinks go, I think obligatory spending is a really good thing. So this could be costs to travel across the map, repair costs, taxes on marketplaces. So you're just sinking currency. And then overall, I think you want some kind of competitive sinks. So competitive dynamic sinks is what I like to call basically auctions. These are things that can come into the economy that players desire, and that they allow for a percentage of tokens to leave the market, and therefore the supply can be kind of elastic of the token, allowing it to expand and contract as much as needed to stabilize the currency.
One of the things that I was considering when you were saying a measured increase in player amount, are you saying that, if there's an uptick in player behavior, you would then increase dynamically like the inflation rate or the amount of NFTs that are available to purchase because of the rising amount of players in the ecosystem?
Yeah. So if you gate your player base through like an NFT, let's say, this is one way that you can monetize demand. or speculative demand too, because if people are really trying to get into your game, the value of the assets will go up. Therefore, you'll drive more royalty revenue back to the treasury, and you can increase the new NFT, say released at an auction, to increase if you need to allow more players into the game, to reduce the value of the NFT, say to stabilize it, But essentially, if you're just letting anybody join the game, you're kind of reducing demand overall for the economy. And you also run into issues with like the free rider problem, which is people don't really have a stake in the game. They just are there to, like some people say, extract, to take away. Really, these Web3 economies are all shared resources. Like we share the game. We're kind of all a part of the game. We want to be, owners in the game. So if you have people coming in for free and taking from the game, that can be a huge issue. I mean, even in rural economies, that can be an issue. So,
Would you say that, like working on an on-chain game, this influences how you think about the economy? So that you say, okay, like it's harder to control at a later point. So we need to make sure to build it like slowly and correctly from the start.
Well, we use actually upgradable contracts. So we can, through governance, we can update the game state if we need to. And that's just, based on players voting to put those changes through. So we can still change things after launch. I think the thing is letting the player base size runaway inflation. That's where you run into issues like such as Axie, where you just haven't balanced things, faucets, sinks in a way that could allow for such a population. So doing it slower and measured is probably a better approach.
I think one of the tricky bits is even after you scale up effectively, you need to also be able to scale down effectively. And that's a much more difficult problem because it's easy to get things out. It's easy to give things out. The question mark of how to get things out of the economy when NFTs and tokens are owned by somebody else. You can't just like have it burn. You have to get them to spend it or get rid of the asset in some way, and then increase potentially a burn percentage on each part of those transactions to help suck the excess supply out. I think designing something like that effectively is the tricky challenge.
Yeah, I think what you're hinting at is like if you scale up the NFTs based on the players coming in, and you have a lot of players coming in, and you scale up the NFTs, and then all the players are leaving again, you still have all those NFTs in circulation. So what do you do with those?
Right.
So it's, I think, like we've thought a lot about like dynamic supply of these assets, and it's hard. Like I think the way we approach this is kind of like from a season to season basis. So like our season is, let's say, 6 weeks or so. So it's kind of like more of a careful calculation of like how much we increase the NFTs the next season. So if there's like explosive growth, maybe we just don't take that growth at face value. We look at like retention and kind of estimate how many of those folks will be around for the next year or two, if you can even do that math, but at least for the next few months, right? So I think that's also a really good point. Like some people think, okay, dynamic supply of NFTs is the really good answer to all these problems, but they bring all sort of other problems with it. Same goes for like fixed supply, also really hard, because if you have fixed supply and you all of a sudden have a lot of users coming in, then the prices of NFTs become too high, and that increases, like that's like a barrier for entry for a lot of folks if the prices become too high. But the ones that are sitting on the NFTs, they like are excited about it because they can make money. But at some point, other folks don't come in. So long term, it actually hurts the project, I think, and even the players that sit on the NFTs. So I think that's also really interesting to think about.
Bring up a really good point about seasonal NFTs, and I think that's kind of where the meta is going to go, in my opinion, where you get ever increasing amounts of NFTs, but maybe not all of them are valuable. Specific seasons or specific ones, and I think that's how you solve the problem of inaccessibility. I don't know if you necessarily want to dilute the price of high value NFTs, because then you just piss everybody off. But if you come in for accessibility in a different way through different sets, different introductions of different seasons, for example, I think that is something that can work long term.
Yes. So, I mean, yeah, we have a little bit of a different model, which is kind of different from how everybody else does it, because we have like a full ownership model, and we use what would be called the real world is like a reserve model, right? So we have like 100% reserve, and we stabilize. We attempt to stabilize the NFT prices actually, rather than let them be speculative. So, the idea behind the NFTs is that they're governance of the protocol. They're fully owned by the players. The protocol is fully owned by the players. All the revenue is mostly owned by the players. And actually, they can remove our small percent of royalties if they want to, if we're not doing a good job. So it gives like a full agency to the player base, like full ownership. I don't think, and so with that, you get, I think, a lot more of the value of the treasury, let's say, attributed to the value of the NFT. And basically what we attempt to do is, based on revenue to the treasury and the player base growth and stuff like that, we attempt to stabilize the NFT increase. Therefore, we're not trying to dilute the price. And that also serves to drive demand for the token, because the only way to get the new issuances is to bid on it in our auction. So that's our main sink in the game.
Is that auction similar to like a bonding curve, or curious about the auction mechanic?
The auction itself is a bit of a game. Actually, it's pretty fun. Well, I guess it depends on what your definition of fun is. But it's a blind uniform auction. So uniform auction is where all players who win the auction pay the same price. So if there's 10 NFTs released at the auction, and if I'm the biggest bidder and I bid 1,000 tokens, but the last winning bidder, the 10th winning bidder, bids 100 tokens, everybody pays 100, and the rest are reverted. Now we obfuscate the bids by doing what's called a deposit sealed bid auction. So players can deposit tokens at the auction, which obfuscates the bids that they submit from those deposited tokens. And this makes it sort of like maybe like a poker type game where people are bluffing that they might bid 10,000 tokens, but they really only bid 1,000 tokens. And we've created a reward model out of this auction. So the more the tokens that you bid get taxed, and that gets sent to a reward pool. And those reward pool tokens get redistributed back to the depositors based on the size of their deposits. So it incentivizes people to deposit a lot of tokens at the auction to make it hyper competitive and make it like a really interesting bluffing kind of game. So it's not just like some frictionless I win the NFT just because I bid more than the other people. It's sort of like a little bit of a mind game. It's fun. It's randomized rewards, so you can get any random ship. It could be a 1 of 1. It could be anything. It's just like the original NFT mint. So it's a little bit, I wouldn't call it a loot box, but it should be fun in a sense, because a player could get any kind of ship. It's not just a standard ship or anything like that.
It's a pretty sharp mechanic. I like it.
And I guess like back to the initial question, right? Like, what's fun? I bet like that auction, folks in your game probably get super excited about the auction and the outcome and just the whole, game theory of this. So it's perfect.
Yeah, I agree that it's really cool design. So I guess, yeah, we touched on other things here. So let me try to recap a little bit. So basically what we have is, first, of course, is the supply and the distribution of it. And then we have to find consumption sinks, right? And I guess like if we talk about scaling down NFT supply, related to it is also like, how do the NFTs, like in the economy, should they capture value? Like, do you want them to increase in value, or do you want to basically cap the ROI on them, right? So maybe you have some thoughts around that, like what's your philosophy here, and maybe like if you're like planning to have value accrual.
I guess I could start here. Just as like a simple model, what we've done at My Crypto Heroes, the previous game that I worked at. So it's basically the The heroes themselves, so basically you need a hero to go on the quest, right? And every hero has a stamina system, so you can, let's say, do 4 quests a day. Every quest has a chance to drop a certain weapon. Sometimes it's an off-chain weapon, sometimes it's an on-chain weapon. And if it's an on-chain, NFT weapon, you can earn and you can sell that weapon. And that was kind of like the whole model. So the thinking was kind of like, okay, I buy a hero, and the hero has kind of like an expected cash flow, so to speak, in like very financialized terms, of like future weapon drops in these quests. So then if okay, every month I can make, let's say, 0.2 ETH in weapon drops, that hero is priced, let's say, for example, like at, I don't know, 3 ETH or 4 ETH. So it's kind of like a net present value of like, your future estimates. But the hero itself, like, is going down in value over time, because it's also going to be more heroes in circulation. The weapons are also going down over time because there's like more weapons in circulation. So it's kind of like a race against inflation, if that makes sense. So you just need to make sure you consistently grind every day to like get these rewards, to kind of capture the value of the hero and kind of sell these things. That was like really well perceived back then, but I would also say it just led to inflation of weapons, and then weapons just went to near zero, kind of like share a bit of the learnings of like that ecosystem. So the weapons just like, I mean, they didn't go to zero, but like just gravitated towards zero, like similar to SLP, I would say. And then if the expected value of the weapons, the rewards go near zero, then the value of the heroes also go down, because if I can't earn anything, why would I need to hold a hero that's so expensive? So that kind of thinking of saying, okay, you have this, how do I say, like, obligation to keep farming to justify the value of your heroes, is just like a times race against inflation. And I think that's really, really hard. And I think I would say a lot of NFT games are probably still that way, where like the only way to, or the biggest motivation to keep playing is to just like earn money. And I need to play fast and I need to play regularly to kind of like get my ROI. And I think the industry is kind of like moving away from these things, more towards like, okay, I actually enjoy the game. I want to have fun with the game. And like ideally, okay, I have fun, but if I play really, really well, or I have like expensive heroes and play really, really well, I can get some rewards. And that should not be, how to say, it should not be such a linear thinking of, if I play every single day, I can make more money. I think it's more different of like, I like the game, I play the game. If I get an NFT, that's a nice bonus of it. And it's like maybe like a rare NFT that's like legendary that other people are going to buy from me. But I think, at least that's what we're looking at Mighty Action Heroes now. It's like we want to move away from this hyper financialized thinking and kind of go towards like a more sustainable, I play the game because I enjoy it. Plus there's like this economy layer that I also enjoy with like trading and crafting and all these things. So, just to answer the question, like what is better, I think it really depends on the game. If you want to cap the ROI of the assets, or if you don't. For us, it's more like, the gameplay is a bit detached from like how much you can earn. And if you play really, really well, then you should earn more than folks that are in the middle of the pack. That's kind of like how we see it. Yeah, just curious to hear, like, Nick, Heimdall, if you have any stories or any like takeaways from projects that you've worked on, or maybe Heimdall, what you're currently building, like how you approach this.
Yeah, I can talk quickly. That's interesting that you talked about the item stuff with the inflating supply, because I've seen some other projects too, like other NFT projects that just have like 1 million NFT swords and stuff, and there's just so many of them. It's like their collection is crazy bloated. That's like one of those things where it's like good to have a way to like sync those two, right? Maybe salvage them or use them for some other use case in the game. As far as value accrual goes in our game, everything accrues basically to the NFTs. That we designed that so that like the players basically, own the ecosystem, like I said before. So the royalties are accruing to the NFTs, to the treasury. We kind of designed the model similar to like nouns. If you know, like nouns, they're these generative pixel avatars, and they have one that gets sold every day at an auction. And you can think of that auction as sort of like the engine for their protocol that's accruing value to their treasury. And I think they're selling for 32 ETH every single day. still to this day. And that's partly due to the 28,000 ETH that they have in their treasury. That value reflects back on the NFTs, and therefore every day people are like obligated to bid on these essentially. And so that was kind of the kernel of the idea for our auction mechanic, except we decided to drive the value towards the game token instead of nowhere. But so the auction works as an engine, and then we're adding another engine in the game. The game is another way to spin up the economic velocity, essentially. So more value accrual to the NFTs over time. And the NFTs, you need to actually play the game and get the token. The token's distributed meritocratically. So like you need to have skill, you need to input activity, you need to take risk, right? You can burn your NFT in the game. So we wanted to emulate, in some sense, like real world competition. Players should have a lot of skill. They should have a lot of strategy. The more active players should be rewarded more. I mean, they're playing more, right? The players who take more risks, just like in real life. If you're an entrepreneur, you get rewarded more, right? You might actually, you might fail, right? But if you succeed, you get rewarded a lot. So we tried to emulate a lot of that stuff with the game as best we could.
For me, I'm much more focused on using tokens and NFTs as a vector for network effect growth. So I'm not necessarily focused on rewarding players for just playing the game. I want to reward streamers for streaming the game, helping lower UA costs and things like that, or incentivizing people effectively to develop and then curate really good UGC content. Because when that is created, the game itself will create more demand, and demand brings in, revenue. And I think the revenue piece is important. For anything to have value, it needs to have some sort of revenue helping back it, or else it is just pure speculation and just what everybody determines is a fair price or, an appropriate price for trading on it. So I think having a focus on where is the new money going to be coming from, and how is that new money going to be sustainably produced in the ecosystem, and why? I think that's my main focus for value accrual. It's not necessarily value accruing to the NFTs or the token itself. It's more, how is the game ecosystem gaining value over time, and then where is that value being distributed? Maybe it's accruing to the token in the form of purchasing the token on the open market, burning it, for example, or it's giving out dividends. I'm not necessarily saying that any of these are, I'm not a lawyer, not a financial advisor either. I assume that, we have to say that every single time, but these are just methods for distributing the value back to the people in the ecosystem. And so it's not necessarily about value accrual. It's more, where is the value coming from, and then where does it go to? And I guess that is the definition of value accrual.
I think it's also like, how do you bridge the value where it accrues and where people receive it? Like the way we look at this from our more casual game perspective is that we have Web3 users, but we'll also have Web2 users, and the question is like, how do you bridge like both, but also in terms of like just value accrual and these things. And again, this is not legal advice, but you need to be very careful with passive income and dividends and staking and all these things. And the way we think about it is like, we have an ecosystem NFT that kind of spans across the whole ecosystem. We will also have an ecosystem token eventually. And we need to think like, how do we give value to the holders of those tokens? And we have a mechanism currently in the Mighty Net is like the ecosystem that we're building. And in the Mighty Net, you can kind of like link your NFTs for like 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year. The longer you link, the more points you get. And we're thinking, for example, let's say you link those ecosystem NFTs or tokens, you get, let's say, like a season pass NFT. And let's say a whale has like 100 season pass NFTs every single season as like a reward. And then if you have, let's say, we have 2 players that just open the game on their phone, have no idea about wallets or crypto. They just go into the game, in-app purchase like a season pass, and then that just like, sweeps the floor of all the season passes that are like maybe somewhere in the pool. So kind of like that money or like that, fiat currency from the from the Web2 user gets converted to, I don't know, ETH, USDC, or an ecosystem token, and then purchases that season pass NFT, which gets redeemed and then goes into like the whale's pocket instead of like the studio's pocket. So that's kind of like how we envision a rev share model that's like, not directly rev share model, that's like still legal. And because at the end of the day, like you might also want to ask like a studio, like, why would you want to do this? Why do you want to share revenues with like your engaged players? I think for us, it's kind of like, it's like affiliate marketing on steroids. Like you have all these like super engaged folks doing content, as Nick said. You want to like reward your content creators, your streamers, I don't know, guild leaders and all that. Like they really are active on Twitter and in the trenches and doing like community events in their hometowns and countries. And I think you should reward them. I guess, I mean, it goes to like a broader, Web3 mindset. I think we all agree that you want to build a community, like a digital nation, rather than, a company and consumers. Like that's like what we're here for. So that's kind of like, is our vision of like bridging the two in terms of financial incentives as well.
Let's talk a little bit more about these differences, because we like look at Web2 game economies, right, and what they do, and like, what would you say is something that we should learn from them? But then, what are also the parts that we should do differently? Like, forget about their learnings. Like, some of the stuff is probably not applicable, right? So, something like, okay, we have like a different, more community-focused UA, for example, or anything else. Yeah, what do you think? Like, should we learn, and what should we unlearn, basically?
I have a short. I spoke a lot, so I'll have a short one in this one. So I think what's good about Web2 games is that it's simple onboarding. It's like easy to like play the game and spend in the game. I think Web3 games are too hard to like onboard and spend. I think that needs to improve. What we need to forget from the Web2 space to the Web3 space is that I think the whole like, the cost per install needs to be lower than lifetime value. Like that whole math, I think, doesn't hold in Web3. What do they spend? They spend in terms of like bringing other users in like long-term secondary revenues and whatnot. I think we haven't cracked that math yet, but I see a lot of folks in the Web3 space still thinking about the whole CPI LTV calculation, and I don't like that.
Yeah, I'm curious to know what that the new metric will be, because at the end of the day, it is requiring people to come in to pay money for the game or the ecosystem itself to make money, because money doesn't come from nowhere. I completely agree that UA is going to be the main vector for growth and innovation, because Web2 companies sometimes spend 50 to 80% of their operating revenue on UA. And if Web3 can represent a new vector for UA and take money out of the hands of, say, advertisers and put it into the hands of players that are distributing the game to their friends, I think there's an opportunity there. Something that I think Web2 games really did right, and it allowed it to become as massive as it is today, is a super high reliance on data to drive decision making. I think that has taken a lot of fun out of a lot of games and really turned it into more of a Skinner box. And so I'd say that is something that needs to be forgotten as well. But we just shouldn't forget every bit of it. I think there's pieces that are really positive about just understanding what drives continual adoption is super, super key.
It's an interesting question. I think my whole approach has been basically forget everything from Web2 games and just focus on open economy design. I mostly read books from like the early 1900s to the 40s and 50s when they were trying to figure out how money worked originally. I think that's a really good place to start for anybody else who's looking to get into this because they didn't know how it worked back then. And I don't think we still know how it works today, but they definitely figured a lot of things out. So I like to focus on traditional economics as much as I can. I'm always kind of reading. I have a ton of books in my backlog, but Web2 games, there is a lot to learn in terms of what players value, I guess. And how they value things differently from the real world. So in terms of things like virtual cosmetics and stuff like that, it doesn't have any, I mean, I guess there is some parallels, but I don't know, like one of my favorite games when I was a kid was Diablo 2, right? And in Diablo 2, their soft currency, which was gold, was basically worthless, right? There's just, you do everything, anything you do, you get gold. Then you go to the NPC, you sell stuff, you get more gold. And then there's nothing to do with all the gold you get. But the thing that ended up being the actual currency was like Stone of Jordans, or was these things called high ruins, which you could make the best items in the game with, right? People use those as essentially a nominal unit of current currency, or like a numeraire, right? So looking at examples like that, I think are super useful because you can see why it works so well, the kind of utility that it had, or the kind of demand that it had. And so just, I guess, going back through traditional games and looking for those really special instances of where currency arose when it wasn't intended to be a currency.
One other thing I would say is a good mindset shift is in Web 2, a lot of free-to-play designers think about time and like how much time somebody needs to spend in the game grinding, and then how does that relate to the amount of money that they would spend to save. And I think that works really, really well for a account-bound one-track mindset where you as an individual are going through an experience and progressing. Where it doesn't work is an open economy where everybody can be trading with each other or just purchasing things on a variable market. And so any traditional free-to-play designer that's thinking about that needs to throw that rule out. They can't be thinking about like, how does this relate to time? It needs to more relate to how does this relate to the demand experienced by the entire economy at any given time. Yeah, and that might deal with population sizes, and might deal with total supply sizes of NFTs or tokens, and where those sinks and faucets are coming from.
Could you all share a little bit of the resources? So I have down like early 1900s books about traditional economics, traditional games, like anything else you're looking at. Yeah, would also be cool for the audience just to learn.
Yeah, look at the curve wars. It's a difficult, thorny topic in DeFi, but it's super fundamental to understanding liquidity and why liquidity matters. It also teaches you a lot about like VE tokenomics, X tokens, staked tokens, the power of incentives, how tokens move across the ecosystem and why. It gives you a pretty fundamental understanding of how tokens are traded. And so if you're looking to just get a super high value learning piece that is really difficult to dive into, but it's useful to understand, the curve wars.
Nice one. Yeah, that's a really hardcore but really, really good resource. I think if that's like, the end boss of tokenomics, if you understand this. I think in a bit more like light, if you're a bit more earlier in your journey, diving down the rabbit hole, I think just like pick a blockchain game that you like, get active there, play it, try to like break down the economy, figure out, okay, where are all the faucets and sinks, where is the value accrual happening, understand over time what's been going right, what's been going wrong with it, and understanding like how they reacted to it. I think Axie is still a great example because they have learned from their economy. They've been changing their ecosystem a lot since then. They've built a whole new revamped version of the game. They added now like Axie specific progression where you can like level up the actual axes on chain actually, which is kind of cool. Just like understanding how they got there, it's pretty interesting because when you make certain decisions in games, you might not see it in week 1 or week 2 or even like month 1 or month 2. Maybe you see it in like 2-3 years down the line. So I think Axie is still a great example. Again, I'm biased here probably, but My Crypto Heroes, back in like 2018 and 19 was the #1 blockchain game. And with like, I think we had like 5,000 monthly active users back then, which was a lot, based on like how big the space is now. And I think there's some good writings there as well, like what was the ecosystem about, and why it eventually failed. And yeah, I guess just generally like hanging out in Twitter spaces. I would say there's still no real answers yet. So anything you read is just for inspiration. Like there are no experts. We are no experts either. We're just trying to figure this stuff out. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. So I think it's still a great time to get involved. and learn and bring your unique perspective into the space, and kind of co-learn with everybody.
Yeah, I 100% agree with Michael. I'm definitely not an expert. I'm just trying to figure things out, as he said. Everything I say is my opinion. And I will say that is a great approach. That's how I started in this space. I was looking for answers. I was trying to solve problems that current games had, and I thought I think I figured out a way to solve a problem, right? And that's how I ended up working at Citadel. The other thing I would say is you need context when you're learning. I think a great way to do it is, at least for me, having Citadel has been great, especially when I'm reading different things, because everything I read is in reference to Citadel. Even if I'm reading an economics textbook, I'm still thinking about Citadel in terms of every single thing that I read. So either come up with an idea yourself or get together with a group of people and come up with an idea, and then think about that idea every time you're looking at something else, because that'll give you a good frame of reference. It'll give you ideas to how to do things to stabilize a currency, or create intrinsic value or demand for a currency, or any of these things. I think a great starting point is the Machinations Manifesto. You can just Google that. It's in the articles. It's very simple, very straightforward, written by Edward Castronova is one of the first virtual economists, studied like EverQuest, I think, back in the day. He has also got a great book called Virtual Economies, which is a good primer on virtual economics. As I said before, traditional economics books, pretty much anything you can read, just read it and then refer it back to what you're trying to make. And that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like your point about. There was something you said right in the middle, right before Machinations Manifesto. I lost it because I was looking up Machinations Manifesto. Shoot, never mind.
Yeah, was it the having context to your ideas?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. Yeah, I'm a big fan of that too. It really helps to, I guess, ground your thoughts in no longer being in hypothetical land and more just like, okay, how would I actually do this? And so I can't recommend that enough. Like, come up with a game that you just start putting on paper and then start thinking about how you would apply these concepts to your game. And then share it with a couple other people. Like, don't be worried about people stealing your idea because, frankly, somebody else has that idea already. This is kind of how innovation happens. Like, lots of people read similar things, get inspiration from lots of different sources, and then come to conclusions and are freaked out when their conclusions are similar to another person's. It's like, no, that just means you guys are thinking similarly. And it happens all the time in history. So don't be worried about people stealing your idea because somebody already stole your idea. And they're probably looking at you like, hey, why'd you steal my idea? So like, ideas are typically not novel. Share them and, keep improving, because there's always the next idea. There's always the next innovation that you can build on top of. And the big innovations will come when all of these current innovations get to market. Some fail, some succeed, but then those ones that succeed will be remixed. And so that's what I'm really excited about. Like, that's where I think tokenomics is going is, it's the composability, the Lego blocks, the idea that some will work, some won't. And the things that do work will be remixed again and again and again until we create something truly amazing.
Yeah, what kind of innovations do you see like in the near term for tokenomics? I know, like, Michael, you using, I think, bonding curves for the crafting right now, right? For the grenades
as an experiment. Yeah.
Okay.
Again, I don't know what's gonna happen. I think for us it's just also having fun and like experimentation and just throwing some things at the wall and see what sticks. Obviously, like, only experiment with stuff that is reversible. So don't experiment with things that are irreversible, which could mess up the entire economy. Yeah, I don't know if bonding curves are the final answer to a lot of the problems. They may not. I think there are some interesting things you could play with. One thing that we're thinking about, and again, I think it's like mental models, like how do you approach NFTs? I think NFTs, they have different rarities in a lot of games. Like for our game as well, there's like common NFTs, uncommon, rare, epic, legendaries. Just let the common NFTs be really common, like give a lot of them to players so that they can experience the feeling of owning assets, play with wallets, have the barrier to entry like really, really small, like let's say, I don't know, 50 cents or $1 for the cheapest NFT. But make sure that the very rare NFTs like legendaries are actually like valuable, and that there's no inflation in those, so that whales can buy them up, and that's kind of like a different asset class, so to speak. Just in terms of like innovation, I see some games playing with like export fees. So when you export like an asset as an NFT into your wallet from the game, it costs, let's say, 50 cents or $1, just to like make sure that the floor price is kept on the marketplace. I think Axie does that with the runes. I think like the different rarity of the runes cost differently to like mint them to your wallet. I think it's an interesting tool to kind of also monetize and have revenues for the studio. But again, I think I'm actually really, that sounds bad, but like I'm actually really happy that the whole play to earn thing is dead, and a lot of studios raced with that promise. So now they have a lot of money and a lot of like brain power to like figure out something else. So I want to see what that something else looks like. So that's why I'm also like super stoked to like see what the next few years bring in this space in terms of innovation.
Yeah, I can say. So yeah, I think, I think there'll be a move towards really focusing on whatever currency is the medium of exchange, right? Because there's usually there's usually two token or two asset ecosystems, right? So it's like a value accrual asset, and then there's the currency that's supposed to be used for trading and stuff. I think the currency that's going to be used for trading, people will move towards really focusing on making sure that they're stable. In my opinion, to accrue liquidity to a token, you need to have stability. Stability is probably the best thing you can do for liquidity accrual over any kind of perverse incentive programs. That and asset correlation. So correlated assets. Say I have Ethereum in the treasury, and then somehow I correlate my currency to the Ethereum in the treasury. If the value is correlated to the Ethereum, then people won't be afraid of impermanent loss, which means they'll be more willing to add more liquidity. If there's a lot of economic velocity, that means they're earning a lot of fees with basically no risk of impermanent loss, which means lots of liquidity.
I think adding in terms of liquidity here, I like the liquidity pools for ERC 1155 tokens. I think there's folks at Skyweaver, they're building Nifty Swap. And I think there's some other experiments out there. So just basically buying and selling ERC 1155 NFTs as if they were ERC 20 tokens, and just kind of like tapping into an order book. I think we'll see more of these things, just to kind of streamline liquidity with NFTs.
And yeah, so the other thing was, because I think something that is known about but sort of underappreciated in like at least the GameFi space or crypto gaming space, let's say, is token taxes or transaction liquidity pool taxes for tokens. I don't think they should just be. They should have some sort of design element to them. They shouldn't just be a 2% tax or 3% tax or something like that. And this is something an economist named Tobin talked about back in the 80s. He came up with the idea for Forex taxes or foreign exchange currency taxes. In this sort of world that we're going to be living in, I think in the future, where all of these tokens are going to be very competitive, you want to have a stable currency, right? You want people to feel confident holding it. And so the use of like something like a dynamic tax that starts after, creating what's called a currency band. So like if my token is 10 cents, I want to keep it between 10 cents and 20 cents. I'll make the tax come into effect as soon as it leaves that range, right? And then it will scale parabolically, essentially, until it comes back into the range, and then the tax drops off. So you essentially create a decentralized currency band through a dynamic tax. I think that'll be something we might see more of soon.
Heimdall, question for you. Why not just use a stablecoin instead of going through all the trouble to make your own native stable currency?
This is kind of the same in real world economies. It'd be like, why doesn't Mexico use the dollar? They have more control over their economic policy. They can issue more money if they want to. It's more about the control of your currency. So you want to be able to stimulate the economy if you need to, or you want to be able to modulate your economy as much as you can. You want to have as many levers at your control as you can. This is kind of like a lot of the issues with the Eurozone. Some of the economies, when they move to the euro, are not doing so well. Some of them are doing really well, right? So not having this control over it means that some economies will kind of be in, what do they call it? In like deflation, right? But it's not in their control anymore because now they're using the euro and they have to, submit to the council of, central banks in the Eurozone. So, so having control of your monetary policy is I think pretty critical. If you're not going to try to make your currency stable, then you should not have a soft currency. I don't think it's a good idea because if it's not worth anything, people are going to think your game's less fun. I mean, it's just unfortunate. Even if your game's super fun, if your currency is not worth a lot, people will be like, I'm going to go play the game that has the currency that's worth something that, I can, everything's going to be pretty financialized, I think, in the future. So.
Yeah, to sum that up, if you're not prepared to be your own central bank, maybe use a stable coin. But if you're ready to take on the challenge of fiscal and monetary policy, better to have native.
Yeah, no, I like ETH better than stable coins. But yeah, Michael, sorry.
No, I just want to actually ask because we've been thinking about this as well for some time. Like, how do you react if the price falls below that certain threshold? In like over a long time?
You can move the currency band, or you can use liquid, like you can use ETH to stabilize the price if you want to. So that's how, like, there would be like a currency board in like a developing country, let's say, that would handle that automatically. We can do it automatically with smart contracts. So we just have a pool of ETH that it has sitting aside to bring it back in, or you can make it a gain in a sense. You can have those taxes accrue to a reward pool, and then players that issue transactions to bring the currency back into the currency band get rewarded from that pool. So you can decentralize the incentives there, and make it fun in a sense.
That's cool.
I guess.
Yeah, I think making a game is pretty cool. I haven't thought about that. Like incentivize players to just, like, if the price is low, just let them put in some ETH and give them a good rewards for that. Because you can't keep deploying capital. I mean, we've seen that with Luna and UST. So I think it's interesting if it's actually part of the gameplay, which is another layer of fun. That's cool.
Yeah, and the other thing is too, if you do have like in our simulations, like we've shown that the currency does tend to have like some sort of intrinsic value. So we call it entangled, but it's sort of like entangled with the treasury value through the governance asset. And so if there is sort of like this lower bound value, it'll at least bounce off of that at some point. So that's like worst case scenario. But there's quite a lot of options once you start to think about things. And like, I just want it to be stable. I don't want the number to go up, because that's not a medium of exchange anymore. Number go up is a value accrual token, and people will start hoarding it. That's not what you want with a currency. You want people to use it, and to feel safe holding it for a long enough time that they don't just want to dump it for ETH or USDC right away, because that's what happens. Everything is competitive here. If I think the token's going to go down even a little bit, I'm going to sell it right away. That's just, you're not a value extractor. You're just smart. So
to me, that's the biggest difference between crypto tokens, the cryptocurrency markets, and say foreign currencies. For example, going back to Mexico, if you get the peso, if you think that your peso is going to inflate or depreciate faster than, say, a dollar, it's actually quite difficult to swap out, especially because you need the peso to do your everyday life, and you also need to pay taxes in the peso, right? But in crypto, everything's a trade-off. And so I'm actually postulating that it might be better for crypto tokens to be slightly deflationary rather than inflationary, especially if you have a monopoly over the ecosystem in which you would use the token. Because if you want the benefit of the token, the services, the game, whatever, you have to use the token. And so while it could be appreciating over time and you would be losing out on the appreciation if you spent the token in the present, you also would be barred from getting the benefits of spending that token in the present. So I am thinking that maybe native tokens might be better to be slightly deflationary in crypto, in contrast to what typical currencies need in the real world, because of the speed of the trade-offs.
Yeah, that can be like a factor of demand, right? Especially if you have like a bidding mechanic where people are super demanding a certain asset, like our governance asset. If people are bidding a ton of the token, that makes it deflationary in a sense. I mean, we focus on the emission curve being a reducing curve, so we do want it sort of deflationary in a sense. I mean, of course, the supply is increasing, but the curve of emissions is decreasing. I think that creates a much better than the parabolic increasing curve. But
sorry, guys, I have to stop you because we are over 1 hour. But it was a great discussion, and
The listeners love it. Come on.
Yeah, I know they do. So maybe a second episode. But yeah, I mean, it was great, and I give each one of you like 30 seconds to shill whatever you like, shill yourself, shill your project.
Sure. I guess I'll go first. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed listening. I hope you took some nuggets away, and frankly, I really hope you joined the space, because the space needs more brilliant thinkers from lots of different backgrounds, because that's what creates the innovation that keeps the space going. If you're a game that's looking for, assistance with your economy, or just looking for like an economic audit, something low format, yeah, reach out. I'm available for services. I typically do only work with venture-backed games, because I really hope to be changing the industry with some of the smartest people. But if you've got questions, I'm usually quite responsive. So hit me up on Twitter or LinkedIn. It's at Metzler Games, METZLER Games. Yeah, happy to hear your thoughts.
Cool. Yeah, it was super fun to chat with both of you, Kepler with you as well, of course, about all these things. I think it's still early stages, so I think we're all learning from each other. So if you want to, jam on some things or have some questions, feel free to reach out on Twitter. You can find me at marnold_mch. And yeah, I'm building the game Mighty Action Heroes, which is an open beta, so you can play it without any NFTs. Go check it out. Jump on our Discord, give us feedback. But more importantly, check out different other games. Get a broad overview of the space. Try on-chain games. Try off-chain games. And most importantly, just have fun and learn and build more cool stuff together.
Yeah, I agree. Try everything. I think, if you want to be part of the space, try all the games. Yeah, I would say, look where other people aren't looking. I think that's, in terms of becoming a game economist, I think, yeah, trying to find what other people aren't thinking about, or try to think about things in a unique perspective. But yeah, if you have any questions, you can find me on Twitter at HDaxos. I'm always available to answer any questions, or you can come ask me in the Citadel Discord, discord.gg/the Citadel. And thank you, Kepler, for having me on. And I've really enjoyed talking with you, Michael and Nick. I think you guys have really good takes, probably some of the best I've heard. So
thanks. Same to you.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah, it was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed the time.
And thank you, Deus Ex DAO.
You're welcome. No, thanks a lot, and see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to the Deus Ex DAO podcast, a place where some of the most progressive and innovative builders, thought leaders, and traders in the crypto space come together to discuss all areas of the crypto industry. Whether you're into DeFi, Layer 1s, Layer 2s, NFTs, or anything in between, we've got you covered. And as a reminder, nothing said on this podcast should be construed as financial advice or as a solicitation to buy or sell any digital asset or security. The comments, views, and opinions expressed by the hosts or guests on the podcast are their own. As always, you'll need to do your own research.